The glass conference room smelled like stale dark roast coffee and nervous sweat, a specific olfactory blend that usually preceded an unmitigated disaster in the Seattle technology sector. I sat at the head of the polished walnut table, my hands resting flat against the cool aluminum chassis of my workstation. I was 54 years old, and after 3 decades in enterprise software engineering, I was never nervous. Nervousness is a psychological reaction to uncertainty, and I was never uncertain about my code. I was the lead back-end architect at Shift Logix, a logistics infrastructure startup that had spent the last 6 years trying to revolutionize global supply chain routing. For 6 years, I was the sole architect who ensured that our high-frequency data pipelines actually delivered real-time analytics instead of crashing under load. Standing at the interactive whiteboard was Brandon Hastings. Brandon was the founder's son, a 29-year-old with a shiny online business degree, a smile that looked like it had been purchased from a promotional catalog, and a brand new title of Chief Technology Officer. He had held the position for exactly 6 days. In those 6 days, he had managed to use the words synergy, paradigm, and blockchain in a single opening sentence, which I was fairly certain constituted a misdemeanor in at least 4 legal jurisdictions. Harlan, Brandon said, pointing a red laser pointer directly at my projection screen. The crimson dot wavered against the architecture diagram of Module Delta 9, the core load balancing and token authentication engine I had spent 18 months designing and perfecting. I am looking at this repository structure, and frankly, it looks like bloated legacy code. It is heavy, it is redundant, and it lacks aesthetic elegance. The conference room went dead silent. The other 4 engineers around the table, my core development team, stared fixatedly at their desk pads. They knew Module Delta 9 was not bloat. It was a masterwork of low-latency concurrency logic, handling 15,000 concurrent requests per second without allowing our cloud database instances to melt. It was the heart of our entire platform. You do not look at a high-performance jet engine and call it cluttered, simply because you lack the mechanical comprehension to understand what an intake turbine does. It is not bloat, Brandon, I said, my voice measured and low as I adjusted my glasses. It is our primary latency reduction protocol. It bypasses legacy relational queries and routes authentication tokens directly through our in-memory cache layer. It improves system throughput by 25%. If you sever that module, our application programming interface response time will spike from 40 milliseconds to 4 seconds, collapsing our real-time tracking services. Brandon laughed, a sharp condescending sound that echoed off the glass walls. 4 seconds? Who cares about 4 seconds in the real world? People wait longer than that for their morning espresso. Look, I am the Chief Technology Officer now. My father put me in this chair to lean out this company for our upcoming acquisition. Apex Dynamics is looking for clean, streamlined architecture, not over-engineered senior bloat. He walked over to the primary development terminal mirrored on the wall display. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. He had administrator privileges. I had warned Julian Hastings, the company founder and chief executive officer, that granting his son root access to production repositories was the equivalent of handing a loaded firearm to a toddler. But Julian had merely patted my shoulder and insisted that his boy needed to feel empowered to lead the technical transition. "We do not need this complex back-end voodoo," Brandon announced, his manicured fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. "We need a modern, simplified main branch for the buyers to audit." "Brandon," I said, standing up slowly as my voice dropped an octave. "Step away from the repository controller." "I am cleaning house," he sneered. He highlighted the module Delta 9 directory in the central repository tree. "If you delete that directory, our staging and production environments will suffer an immediate infrastructure failure," I warned calmly. "Our automated deployment pipeline is configured to auto-sync to production for tomorrow's final acquisition review." "You worry far too much, Harlan. That is your fundamental flaw as an aging engineer. You are an obstructionist," he declared. With a theatrical flourish that belonged in a cheap community theater production, he hit delete, then executed a force commit and pushed the branch directly to origin main. The wall display flickered. The Git terminal window scrolled green text for 2 seconds, executed the cascade drop, and stopped. Done, Brandon said, dusting his palms together with a self-satisfied grin. Leaner already. The silence that settled over the room was absolute. It was not merely quiet, it was a pressurized vacuum. My junior developer, Toby Miller, whom I had mentored from his first day out of graduate school, looked as though he was about to vomit. He looked at me with wide, frantic eyes, silently begging me to undo the damage. But I could not fix it. Not this time. You just deleted the entire core logic layer of our software platform, I said, taking my seat again. A profound, icy calm washed over me. It was the calm of a structural engineer watching a demolition crew blow out the primary load-bearing pillars of a building, knowing precisely where the ceiling would land. The application is now a decorative front-end shell. It cannot authenticate users, it cannot parse payload data, and it cannot communicate with the database clusters. It is a digital corpse. Brandon turned to face me, his face flushing crimson with anger. See? That is precisely the toxic attitude I am eliminating. You are hostile, Harlan. You are an impediment to innovation, and you are definitely not a culture fit for the new Shift Logix under my leadership. He puffed out his chest. You are terminated effective immediately. Gather your personal belongings and leave the premises before the hour is up. The room gasped. Toby actually stood up from his chair. Brandon, you cannot fire Harlan. Sit down, Toby, Brandon barked, or your position will be evaluated next. I looked at Brandon. I looked at the terminal display where 6 years of my life's work had been stripped down to an empty folder. I looked at my terrified junior team, and then my personal mobile phone vibrated against the table. It had been ringing periodically for 3 weeks from a direct line at Apex Dynamics. I had ignored those calls out of professional loyalty to Julian, the man who hired me 6 years ago. But loyalty is a two-way legal and ethical contract. I picked up the device. The caller identification displayed the name of Conrad Wells, the vice president of engineering at Apex Dynamics. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. This is Harlan Vance, I said clearly. The voice on the other end was composed and authoritative. Harlan, Conrad said, we have not received your final confirmation regarding our executive recruitment offer. We are finalizing our $420 million acquisition due diligence on Shift Logix tomorrow. Frankly, after reviewing their preliminary system documentation, your proprietary architecture is the sole asset of value keeping our investment board interested. I looked directly into Brandon's eyes. He was smirking with his arms crossed, waiting for me to break down or plead for severance. Yes, Conrad, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. I accept your offer as Vice President of System Architecture at Apex Dynamics. Brandon's smirk faltered instantly. Who is that? Whom are you talking to on company time? I can assume my duties immediately. I continued into the phone, completely ignoring the Chief Technology Officer. In fact, my calendar is cleared up unexpectedly as of 2 minutes ago. Conrad paused on the line, sounding pleasantly surprised. That is remarkably fortuitous timing. Is everything acceptable on your end regarding your departure protocol? Everything is proceeding with mathematical precision, Conrad, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Brandon. I will arrive at your corporate headquarters in South Lake Union within 30 minutes. I hung up, closed my laptop, and unplugged my power supply. The smooth click of my briefcase closing was the only sound remaining in the room. Best of luck with tomorrow's acquisition demonstration, Brandon, I said quietly. I walked out of the conference room into the main office floor of Shift Logix. Sales executives were ringing celebration gongs across the floor. Marketing managers were debating brand palettes, and the espresso machine in the lounge was humming loudly. None of them had any idea that their company had just been mortally wounded. They were celebrating on the deck of an ocean liner that had already struck an iceberg. I reached my corner workstation and began packing my personal belongings into a small cardboard storage box. My mechanical keyboard, my personalized desk lamp, and a framed photograph of my late wife. I left the company-branded fleece jacket, the acrylic 5-year service award, and the employee handbook. Harlan? A voice whispered behind me. It was Lyle Jenkins, our lead systems administrator. Lyle was a brilliant infrastructure specialist who lived on caffeine and server diagnostics. He looked at me with sheer panic etched into his face. Is it true? Lyle asked, looking over his shoulder toward the glass conference room, where Brandon was still gesturing animatedly at the whiteboard. Did he actually delete the core optimization module from main? He executed a hard delete on module Delta 9 through the graphical user interface. Lyle, I said, placing my desk clock into the box. He believes he is streamlining our codebase. Lyle turned pale as chalk, but the cloud load balancers depend on Delta 9 for health check heartbeats. If those health checks fail, the automated container orchestration system will trigger an emergency failure recovery in less than 15 minutes. I glanced at my watch. Precisely 12 minutes remaining. The automated system will attempt to provision new server instances to replace the failed ones. But because the deployment script pulls directly from Brandon's newly committed main branch, every new instance will spin up broken, crash immediately, and trigger another provision event. Lyle stared at me in horror. It is going to create an infinite auto-scaling loop. Amazon Web Services will bill the company tens of thousands of dollars per hour as thousands of broken instances spin up and die simultaneously. I have to stop the deployment hook, Lyle said, reaching for his internal access terminal. Do not touch that terminal, Lyle, I commanded firmly. He froze. What? Why? He terminated my employment for obstructionist behavior, I explained quietly. If you intervene without authorization, you are undermining the Chief Technology Officer's direct command. Under the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act regulations and company policy, he will terminate you for cause, and you have twin babies at home and a mortgage to pay. Lyle swallowed hard, looking at the main infrastructure monitoring board on the wall. Every indicator light was currently green, displaying a false sense of security before the impending storm. So we just let the infrastructure implode? Lyle asked in a trembling voice. The fire was set by the Chief Technology Officer, Lyle. You are simply adhering to executive command structure. I picked up my box of belongings and walked toward the elevator bank. Behind me, Slack notifications began pinging rapidly across desks. Toby had sent a message to the engineering channel, indicating that manual builds were failing with catastrophic error codes. The elevator doors opened. As I stepped inside and turned around, I saw Brandon storming out of the conference room, holding his laptop like a shield, his face twisted in confusion as he looked around for someone to fix his mistake. Our eyes met across the open floor just as the heavy steel doors slid shut. 30 minutes later, I walked into the soaring glass and steel lobby of Apex Dynamics in South Lake Union. The facility was a marvel of architectural design, featuring private research labs and state-of-the-art server infrastructure. I was escorted directly to the executive sky lounge on the 40th floor, where Conrad Wells was waiting for me. Conrad was 56 years old, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, and possessed the calm demeanor of an executive who understood both technical architecture and corporate legal strategy. Harlan, welcome, Conrad said, shaking my hand warmly. I did not expect you to be quite this prompt, but your arrival is impeccably timed. I sit before you as a free agent, Conrad, I replied, placing my box on the lounge table. We sat down overlooking Lake Union. Conrad pulled up a confidential dossier on his tablet. Harlan, let us speak candidly, Conrad began. Apex Dynamics has spent 6 months conducting due diligence on Shift Logix for a proposed $420 million acquisition. Our financial team liked their market presence, but our technical team was appalled by their front-end code and chaotic management. However, every time our engineers audited their core data transport layer, the performance metrics were extraordinary. We realized very quickly that you and your architectural design were the sole reason Shift Logix functioned at all. I nodded. I built module Delta 9 3 years ago to ensure our infrastructure could scale cleanly. Well, Conrad continued, about an hour ago, our automated monitoring tools detected that Shift Logix's public application programming interfaces began throwing catastrophic routing errors. What happened? Brandon Hastings deleted module Delta 9 from the production repository to make the codebase look leaner for your audit, I said calmly. And he terminated me when I warned him of the consequences. Conrad let out a low, incredulous laugh. He deleted the primary load balancing module on the eve of a $420 million acquisition audit. Precisely. And because of their automated deployment pipeline, Their cloud infrastructure is currently trapped in an infinite crash loop, generating tens of thousands of dollars in cloud computing overages every hour. Conrad leaned back in his chair, a cold, strategic smile forming on his lips. Then Shift Logix is no longer a viable software company. They are an empty shell presenting broken user interfaces. Under Section 9 of our Letter of Intent, we have an explicit material adverse change clause. If the target company suffers a catastrophic degradation of its core intellectual property or operational capacity during due diligence, we can terminate the acquisition agreement immediately without financial penalty. What are your plans for Project Vanguard? I asked. Project Vanguard is our new global financial transaction network, Conrad explained. We intended to acquire Shift Logix merely to extract your back-end engine and discard the rest of their business. Now that their engine is destroyed and you are here, we will simply build Project Vanguard from scratch under your direct leadership. He presented an executive employment contract. We are offering you the position of Vice President of System Architecture, Equity Partnership, 4 times your previous compensation package, and total authority over engineering decisions. No nepotism, no interference. I reviewed the document carefully. I have one non-negotiable condition, Conrad, name it, Harlan. When Shift Logix inevitably collapses, I want full authority and budget to hire 3 key personnel from their engineering department. Toby Miller, Lyle Jenkins, and Clara Watson from Quality Assurance. Conrad smiled broadly and extended his pen. Agreed, Harlan. Welcome to Apex Dynamics. My first 2 weeks at Apex Dynamics felt like stepping out of a chaotic war zone into a pristine scientific laboratory. There were no ego-driven tantrums, no buzzwords thrown around in place of technical knowledge, and no administrative overreach. Executive decisions were executed swiftly, engineering requests were approved within minutes, and my new team of senior developers operated with exceptional professional discipline. We began constructing Project Vanguard on a modern, ultra-low latency Rust architecture that eliminated entire categories of memory corruption and concurrency bugs. However, my personal mobile device remained a window into the ongoing disaster at Shift Logix. I had maintained a private messaging group titled Lifeboat with Toby, Lyle, and Clara to monitor their well-being. On Tuesday night, Lyle sent a message. Brandon attempted to repair the cloud deployment configuration using a basic text editor. He corrupted the file encoding, and now the entire container registry is locked in an authentication rejection state. Amazon Web Services overage charges have passed $30,000 today alone. On Wednesday morning, Toby messaged, Julian Hastings is threatening to fire the entire engineering department because the front-end dashboard will not connect to the database. Brandon is hiding in his office, claiming that external hackers are attacking the network. I replied calmly to the group, focus on your assigned tasks, document every directive issued by executive management, and do not attempt unauthorized system overrides. Let the executive management bear the full weight of their administrative decisions. On Thursday evening, Clara sent an alarming message. Harlan, they are preparing for tomorrow's final acquisition demonstration with Apex Dynamics. Because they cannot fix the back-end architecture, Brandon and Julian have ordered us to hard-code static JSON data files directly into the front-end user interface. They are going to present a static, fake demonstration screen and pretend the live database is processing real-time transactions. It is a complete Potemkin village. I read Clara's message with a cold sense of indignation. Hard-coding static data to fake a live system demonstration during an acquisition audit was not merely unethical. It constituted intentional fraudulent misrepresentation. I immediately called Conrad Wells into my office and showed him the message thread. Conrad read the text, his expression darkening. They are attempting to defraud our investment committee into executing a $420 million purchase agreement based on fabricated system metrics. I can tell you precisely how to expose the fraud during tomorrow's audit, I told Conrad. When Brandon presents the live tracking dashboard, ask him to filter the logistics throughput by historical data from the third quarter of last year. Their static JSON file only contains mock data for the current month. When he attempts to query historical parameters, the application will fail catastrophically. Conrad nodded slowly. a hard look in his eyes. I will personally attend the audit with our chief legal counsel. Friday morning arrived with gray rain sweeping across Seattle. At 9 o'clock, the acquisition review commenced in Shift Logix's main conference room. While I remained at my workstation at Apex Dynamics, monitoring our clean build progress, Conrad provided me with real-time updates via secure audio link. Julian Hastings opened the meeting with a grandiloquent speech about resilience, corporate agility, and the revolutionary efficiency of Shift Logix's new streamlined codebase. Brandon stood beside the projector, sweating through his expensive blazer as he initiated the demonstration on the wall screen. "Look at the extraordinary speed of our user interface," Brandon boasted to the visiting executives. "Our data routing is smoother and faster than ever before." Conrad's voice came through my earpiece, calm and incisive. "Mr. Hastings, this real-time overview looks adequate. However, for our database integrity verification, please filter the logistics stream to display transaction throughput for the third quarter of last year." There was a sudden heavy silence in the conference room. "Well," Brandon stammered, his voice straining, "we currently archive historical parameters to optimize immediate latency, so third-quarter metrics are temporarily stored in cold storage. Our investment committee requires live verification of historical database queries," Conrad insisted firmly. "Please unarchive the third-quarter dataset now." Brandon panicked. Through the audio feed, I could hear the rapid, desperate clatter of laptop keys. In a desperate attempt to salvage the demonstration, Brandon attempted to open the browser developer tools and edit the local web page parameters live in front of the audit board. The screen flickered, executed an unhandled exception, and displayed a massive red error box across the projector. Error 5003, undefined function execution. The front-end application froze completely. Your application is not executing network requests, Apex's chief legal counsel declared sternly. We are monitoring packet traffic on this local network. You are displaying a static offline file. There is no back-end database connected to this system. Julian Hastings gasped loudly. Brandon, what is the meaning of this? Where is our live platform? It is just a minor network configuration glitch, Brandon yelled frantically. The visitor wireless network is throttling our connection. This is not a network glitch, Conrad stated coldly, standing up from his chair. This is an intentional attempt to present a fraudulent software system during a formal acquisition audit. Shift Logix has suffered a total infrastructure failure, and your executive team has attempted to conceal it. Apex Dynamics is officially terminating all acquisition negotiations, effective immediately under Section 9 of our agreement. Conrad and his legal team gathered their files and walked out of the room, leaving Julian screaming at his son in utter devastation as 6 years of corporate valuation evaporated in a matter of seconds. The aftermath of the failed acquisition was swift and destructive. Within 48 hours, news of the aborted buyout leaked to the venture capital firms that had funded Shift Logix's Series B financing round. The investors initiated an emergency financial and technical audit of the firm. During the audit, another appalling truth emerged. 2 weeks prior to firing me, Brandon had canceled the company's automated cloud backup subscriptions to save $1,200 a month in administrative expenses. When he deleted Module Delta 9 from the main repository, he had inadvertently erased the only existing copy of our core intellectual property. There were no secondary backups. 6 years of proprietary development had been wiped clean from existence. On Monday evening, I met Toby Miller at a quiet diner in downtown Seattle. Toby looked exhausted with dark circles beneath his eyes. Investors have frozen all operating bank accounts, Toby told me, shaking his head in disbelief. Julian fired Brandon in a screaming match on Saturday, but the damage is absolute. Shift Logix cannot process client requests. The remaining staff are manually running database queries in SQL and pasting results into spreadsheets just to keep basic client contracts alive. It is a complete disaster. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out 3 official employment offer packets signed by Conrad Wells. These are formal employment offers for you, Lyle Jenkins, and Clara Watson to join Apex Dynamics, I said, passing the documents across the table. Full competitive compensation, sign-on bonuses, and immediate integration into Project Vanguard. Toby stared at the offer letter with tears welling in his eyes. Harlan, this is incredible. But what about our non-compete agreements with Shift Logix? Julian threatened to sue anyone who leaves for a competitor. Julian's non-compete agreements are legally unenforceable, I assured him, and Apex's legal department will handle any frivolous threats. However, Julian Hastings was not ready to accept responsibility for his own failure. Desperate to avoid complete financial ruin and stave off investor lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, Julian filed a malicious civil lawsuit in Washington State Superior Court against me and Apex Dynamics. The lawsuit alleged that I had engaged in intellectual property sabotage, planted a malicious logic bomb in Module Delta 9 prior to my departure, and violated trade secret protections under federal law. 10 days later, a formal deposition was convened at Apex Dynamics' corporate legal suite. Julian Hastings arrived with a tired-looking litigation attorney. On our side sat Conrad Wells, Apex's senior corporate counsel, and myself. Julian looked haggard and aged, his eyes filled with bitterness, as he pointed a trembling finger at me across the conference table. He destroyed my company. Julian shouted, ignoring his attorney's attempt to quiet him. Shift Logix operated successfully for 6 years. The moment Harlan Vance was terminated, the entire infrastructure collapsed. That is not a technical coincidence. That is intentional, premeditated sabotage. He engineered a logic bomb in Module Delta 9. Apex's lead counsel remained completely unfazed. Mr. Hastings, let the record reflect that under federal copyright law, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, as well as state corporate governance standards, an employee cannot be held liable for system degradation resulting from executive directives executed after their termination. Our attorney opened a thick leather binder and placed several forensic audit logs on the table. Furthermore, Mr. Hastings, our forensic digital examination of Shift Logix's origin repository logs, which we have authenticated under subpoena, proves conclusively that the deletion of Module Delta 9 was initiated at 2:14 in the afternoon by an administrator account logged in under the user credentials of your son, Brandon Hastings. Julian stared at the commit logs in stunned silence as our attorney read the exact terminal command sequence recorded in the metadata. Your son deleted the core architectural module, executed a force push to the master branch, and subsequently canceled the cloud recovery infrastructure. Our attorney explained smoothly. Mr. Vance explicitly warned your executive officers in writing of the catastrophic consequences of that action. Your son ignored those warnings and terminated Mr. Vance for obstructionism. Our attorney leaned forward, his voice hardening. Furthermore, by ordering your staff to hardcode static JSON data files to deceive our acquisition audit board, you and your son engaged in willful dissipation of corporate assets and attempted securities fraud under California Penal Code Section 470 standards and federal regulations. Julian collapsed backward into his leather chair, the color draining entirely from his face as his attorney whispered urgently into his ear. Apex Dynamics is prepared to file immediate counterclaims against you personally for corporate defamation, frivolous litigation, and tortious interference, our attorney declared. However, our client is willing to execute a full mutual release of all claims under 3 strict conditions. What conditions? Julian asked, his voice barely a rasp. First, you will immediately dismiss this lawsuit with prejudice. Second, you will issue a formal written statement confirming that Shift Logix's technical failures were the result of internal management decisions. Third, you will execute an immediate unconditional release of all employment non-compete covenants for Toby Miller, Lyle Jenkins, and Clara Watson. Julian looked at his attorney, who slowly shook his head in resignation. It is over, Julian, his attorney advised quietly. Sign the release. With a trembling hand, Julian signed the legal settlement documents, officially ending his crusade and freeing my team from his grasp. 3 months after the settlement was finalized, Project Vanguard went live across Apex Dynamics' global infrastructure. It was not a noisy, ostentatious launch accompanied by marketing hype or empty corporate press releases. It was a seamless transition executed at 2 o'clock in the morning. I stood inside Apex Dynamics' primary network operations center, surrounded by my restored engineering team. Toby Miller was managing front-end telemetry. Lyle Jenkins was monitoring cloud container health, and Clara Watson was overseeing real-time error logging. System traffic is escalating rapidly, Toby announced with a wide smile. We have just successfully onboarded the Global Freight Partners Enterprise account. Global Freight Partners had been Shift Logix's largest commercial client, representing over 40% of their annual revenue. After Shift Logix's platform collapsed, Global Freight Partners had terminated their contract for cause and signed a multi-year enterprise agreement with Apex Dynamics. What is our operational latency, Lyle? I asked. Watching the global visualization board, 12 milliseconds globally, Lyle reported proudly. System load is under 15% capacity. The architecture is running effortlessly. Zero unhandled exceptions, Clara added. The codebase is immaculate, Harlan. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of professional fulfillment. We had built a system designed to endure, grounded in sound engineering principles and legal integrity. Conrad Wells walked into the operations center carrying a bottle of chilled sparkling water. Congratulations, team, Conrad announced. The executive board has reviewed our launch metrics. Our institutional platform performance has already driven a 4% increase in corporate valuation. He poured a glass and handed it to me. By the way, Harlan, I received a notification from the court-appointed bankruptcy receiver handling the liquidation of Shift Logix's remaining physical assets. What is the status of their liquidation? I asked. Shift Logix has officially entered. Chapter 7, Liquidation, Conrad revealed. Their office lease has been terminated, their office furniture was auctioned off yesterday, and their domain name sold for pennies. Nobody bid on their remaining source code. It is officially defunct. I nodded slowly. It was a tragic end, but an inevitable consequence of leadership that prioritized nepotism and hubris over technical reality and human respect. 6 months after Shift Logix ceased operations, I received an unexpected official communication from the liquidation firm appointed by the Federal Bankruptcy Court. The letter contained an urgent request. The court liquidators were attempting to extract historical financial and logistics records from Shift Logix's legacy local servers to satisfy federal tax audit requirements. However, the legacy database backups were encrypted under an advanced GPG security protocol that required dual administrative authentication. The credentials of the former chief technology officer, which had been corrupted, and the master private encryption key possessed solely by the lead architect. Legally, I had no remaining obligation to assist the liquidation estate. But thousands of small shipping vendors and independent logistics contractors required those historical records to verify their tax filings and receive their final back pay disbursements. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the former office building of Shift Logix one final time. The corporate logo had been peeled off the glass doors, leaving faint, sticky outlines behind. The floor was completely deserted. Desks were disassembled. Server racks stood empty, and silence hung heavy in the air. I met the court receiver, a weary accountant named Steve, standing in the cold server room. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Vance," Steve said appreciatively. "We have been trying to access these historical archives for weeks. We contacted Brandon Hastings, but he claimed he could not remember any administrative passphrases." I sat down at the emergency terminal, connected to the legacy server rack. I connected my secure hardware key, opened the terminal interface, and entered my master decryption passphrase. The terminal window scrolled rapid lines of verification output. GPG decryption complete. Archive manifest extracted successfully. "Is the data recovered?" Steve asked, peering closely at the display. "Every historical transaction record has been decrypted and exported to your storage drive." I confirmed, removing my hardware key. "The vendors will receive their documentation." Steve let out a long sigh of relief. "You are a true professional, Mr. Vance. Thank you for fixing their mess." "I am simply an engineer finishing the job correctly," I replied. As I walked out toward the main entrance, my mobile phone rang. It was an unrecognized number, but I answered it. "Hello, Harlan," a raspy, fragile voice said. It was Julian Hastings. He sounded tired, broken, and defeated. "Julian," I said calmly, "Steve informed me that you came to the building to unlock the contractor tax records." Julian whispered. "I wanted to call to say thank you." You are welcome, Julian. The independent contractors deserve their records. There was a long silence on the line before Julian spoke again, his voice trembling with emotion. Harlan, I have spent the last 6 months reviewing everything that occurred. I lost my company, my life savings, my reputation, and my relationship with my investors. I listened to Brandon when he told me that Module Delta 9 was bloated legacy code. I stood near the glass doors looking out at the Seattle rain. Module Delta 9 was never bloat, Julian, I said softly. It was the structural foundation of your entire enterprise. I know that now, Julian sobbed quietly. I allowed my son to destroy the foundation because I did not respect the architecture, and I did not respect the architect who built it. I am deeply sorry, Harlan. I listened to his apology without malice or anger. The lesson had been delivered by reality itself. Goodbye, Julian, I said, and ended the call. I stepped out into the clean, cool Seattle rain and walked to my vehicle. My phone vibrated with a message from Toby in our Apex Engineering channel. Vanguard just handled 30,000 concurrent transactions per second with zero latency delay. We are ordering lunch to celebrate. I smiled, started the engine, and merged smoothly into the highway traffic, heading back to my team, back to real engineering, and back to the future we had built.